Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 30th of June, 2022. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So the Glacier hard fork went live on mainnet just I think a couple of hours ago, and you can see here Tim Byko posted about it saying 20 blocks past the fork and it's looking good. All monitored nodes except Open Ethereum, which doesn't support the fork, are in sync. No blocks on the old chain so far. So it went through, as expected, right? As I've said before, it was just a hard fork to delay the difficulty bomb till I think September, October. So the race is on now, guys. Like really, this could potentially, this should be the last hard fork before the merge. If we have another one, it'll be because for some reason we haven't been able to do the merge in September and we've pushed it back again and all that sorts of stuff. But we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But I like kind of like when things go smoothly like this and just uneventfully. Like you expect the change to just keep going, right? You don't during these kind of like hard forks. The way they're supposed to work is that on one block you're on the kind of like old, state of the world, and on the next block you're on the new state of the world, and nothing is supposed to break. And that's been true for pretty much all of the hard forks, I believe. There has been kind of like obviously bugs here and there over the years, but yeah, I always love seeing kind of like one of these things go through successfully, even if it's something as kind of like boring as a difficulty bomb delay, right? But yeah, that's live there now. So all good there. Nethermind also released a new version of their client today, so it updates TTD for merge hard fork on the Sassal network, and it makes snap sync the default sync method on mainnet, Gurley, and Ropsten networks. So if you run Nethermind, be sure to update your node to this latest kind of a client to get the benefits of that. There was an interesting thread today from Ethereum pools.info here regarding where the rewards come from after the merge for stakers, right? And what the penalties look like. And I really like this table because it shows exactly what you get rewarded for and exactly what you get penalized for. So on the reward side, there is consensus rewards, and that's broken up into 4 different categories: source, target, head votes, sync committee, block proposal, and whistleblowing. Then you have execution rewards, which are transaction tips, aka fees, that the unburnt fee revenue, MEV rewards, and decrease in ETH supply. So I think those last two, obviously MEV rewards are going to vary depending on kind of like what pool you're with, or what kind of like software you're running on your own solo staking. Are you running like MEV boost and things like that? And then decrease in ETH supply obviously comes from the ETH being burnt, and then over time, you expect the ETH price to go up to reflect that, right, over the longer period. And then on the penalty side, you have slashing, inactivity penalty, attestation penalty, and sync committee penalty. So I've kind of like brought this up a bunch of times on the refuel before, but I think people really need to be aware of the fact that slashing is a very specific penalty. It is specific to if the network thinks you're attacking it, or if you're doing something that the network considers to be hostile to it. And this can happen even if you're not trying to attack the network. As I've said before, you could be slashed for double signing, and that could be you just trying to set up a redundant setup and having your same validator running in 2 places at the same time, and then signing the same thing or voting on the same thing, and then getting slashed for that. Whereas something like the inactivity penalty is what happens when you go offline. And this is very, very different to slashing. You basically slowly leak ETH out over time, but it's so slow that essentially, if you're offline for like a month and then you're online for a month, your rewards would just net out to 0. So you really don't lose much doing that. But in saying that, if a vast majority of if a large part of the network is offline and so are you, then the network starts to think, okay, well, is this an attack, right? And then you get kind of like, I guess the penalty increases from there, and then you lose more ETH because of that. But if you just go offline on your own, maybe your internet went down or something like that, it's definitely not something to worry about. But this kind of like thread here goes through a lot of this stuff that I just kind of like talked about in much more detail. So I highly recommend giving it a read. It's not too long, but I think it's really, really great, especially if you're a solo staker. You definitely want to be aware of all these things in a post-merge world to maximize the rewards you can get, and to obviously minimize or make sure that you don't get penalized ever, pretty much. Like that's the ideal kind of like goal for a validator, right? To maximize your rewards and never get penalized. Obviously, if you go offline because of a network outage or something like that, it's kind of unavoidable. Like you can set up your kind of like set up to be ultra redundant, right? You can have like a UPS, which is a universal power supply, so that if your power goes off, it keeps running, or you can have a backup network, but you can't ever guarantee 100% uptime, right? It's always going to be 99.9%, because what if for some freak reason your backup network also goes offline, right? Or what if for some reason your power goes offline for longer than the UPS can stay online for, or longer than you can kind of I guess, get a new UPS in place or something like that. So there are going to be times, very rare occasions, even if you have ultra redundancy, that you might get kind of like an inactivity penalty. But the thing is that you should just aim for 99.9%, and it's not that hard to get there, to be honest. Like it's quite easy, especially if you have monitoring set up on your own validator, if you're a solo staker, and if you're part of a pool, it differs a bit there. But yeah, anyway, you can check out this thread. I'll link it in the YouTube description. Prysmatic Labs posted their first community update in a while today. So obviously they haven't been posting these because they've been very busy with the merge related work. But this is their first community update since, I don't remember when the last time they did a community update was. So this is for June 2022. Their last update, it was December 2021. So that was, 6-7 months ago now? Yeah, I mean, it feels like that. I haven't seen one of these in a while, but really great to see them back on these updates here. You can kind of read through all of this. These updates are great, guys. Like, if you really want to know what's happening, especially on the kind of like consensus layer, ETH2 side of things, you definitely want to read this. And you also get like a bit of a peek into Prysmatic Labs themselves, see what they're doing, new hires, things like that. So definitely go check this out. I'll link it in the YouTube description. All right, so Vitalik posted some notes around different approaches for capping the validator set size to decrease the load of a beacon chain node and make Ethereum more ready for single slot finality. So I've spoken about this before, especially in the Discord channel, around there being a bunch of ideas of how to cap the validators on, or the validator set size on the beacon chain, so that we can basically do things like, as Vitalik mentioned, single slot finality. Because for those of you who don't know, the 32 ETH requirement for solo staking was not chosen based on the ETH requirement. It was chosen based on how many validators the beacon chain could handle, right? Depending on kind of like a total supply of ETH, you get like a maximum or an upper bound of how much ETH can be staked, and you have an upper bound of validators. But what if we could do it in another way, such that we limit the amount of active validators that can be on the network at any given time, so that we can do things like single slot finality, so that we can potentially bring down the minimum ETH amount required and stuff like that. I don't actually think the minimum ETH amount kind of like required for solo staking coming down is really something that should be a main goal. And I've explained why before, but the number one reason is because even if we get it down to like, 4 ETH or something like that, I mean, if we all expect ETH to go up in the long term, and say ETH is even like $5,000, even at 4 ETH, that's 20 grand. Like, most people don't have 20 grand lying around to drop on a validator, right? So I don't think that should be the priority. I think the priority should be seeing what features we can get out of this sort of work. And one of those features is single slot finality. And how finality works today on the beacon chain is essentially it's 12 minutes. So you have epics, and epic is every 6 minutes, and then 2 epics makes finality. And that means that 2/3 of the staked ETH basically says that anything up until this point, if it gets reverted or if it gets attempted to be reverted, then there is a massive penalty that takes place using that. So it's very strong kind of like economic finality on that kind of like part of the chain. But that limits certain things, it limits certain guarantees. So can we get that down? Can we get that 12 minutes down to potentially single slots, right? And slots being blocks in this case, which means that you could have finality every 12 seconds. From my understanding, that's how it should work. A slot is so a block on the beacon chain is technically called a slot. So a single slot finality would imply that you would have finality every 12 seconds. At least that's my understanding. Hopefully I'm getting that right there. But there are a few different strategies in here that Vitalik discussed, both the pros and cons of, and I highly recommend giving this a read here. It does seem like a quite a difficult problem to solve, especially because there's no kind of like perfect solution. It's basically like everything in crypto, choosing the solution with the least amount of trade-offs, or the trade-offs that you find acceptable. And to do that takes a lot of research, a lot of back and forth, a lot of iteration for us to finally get to a place where we would like to be. And that's how pretty much everything in Ethereum land comes to be, like from scaling to protocol work to sharding to everything else. Like the original vision of sharding was execution sharding, and that has been abandoned a while ago in favor of data sharding, and then that got changed to dank sharding or proto dank sharding as well. So there are always changes happening because we figure out better ways to do things. We figure out simpler ways to do things, and simpler is always better as well, because the thing that I guess like blockchain should strive to do is be as simple as possible while getting the features that we want. Because complexity is really an enemy in this case, especially in economic networks, because the more complex you make it, the more surface attack there is for exploits, for bugs, for kind of like economic attacks, things like that. So if we can simplify things as much as possible, then that is what we should be working towards. And I think that's been true for pretty much every single kind of like upgrade, or every single kind of new thing that's come to Ethereum, even the layer 2 stuff. Like, for example, going back to state channels and Plasma, they had a lot of trade-offs associated with them. They had a lot of overheads. Now we have rollups. Rollups have their own trade-offs, but it's much better than a Plasma or a kind of like state channel network or any of the other constructions back then that were discussed a lot. Rollups are just much simpler. And obviously we can add complexity to rollups. You can do things like layer 3 and recursive proofs, all these sorts of stuff. But what are we getting for that? Well, we're getting massive scale. Is it worth that kind of like trade-off, trading off simplicity for a bit more complexity? Of course it is. And I've discussed this before on the Refuel, especially when Peter from Geth put out his tweet thread. You know, whenever you're looking at adding complexity to Ethereum, for example, you just basically have to do a justification of, okay, if we add this complexity, what's the benefit? Like, do we get 10 times benefit, 100 times, 1,000 times? And I would actually argue that the extra complexity of kind of a roll-up-centric roadmap, which is actually a necessity. It's not something we can even get around. But, you know, in terms of going from just like one singular layer to a roll-up centric roadmap, we get 1,000x benefit. Like, to me, it's an absolutely massive benefit. Not today, right? In the future, but well, hopefully in the future. But, you know, that's kind of like how I view these things. So definitely give this a read here, because talking about roll-ups perfectly segues me into the next thing I wanted to talk about, which was the Arbitrum drama. Now, of course, a lot of you will know that the Arbitrum Odyssey event has been paused because the Arbitrum network got congested. Now, people may be wondering, how did the Arbitrum network get congested? How did the fees on Arbitrum actually get more expensive than on layer 1 Ethereum? Well, my friends, it has got pretty much nothing to do with all the FUD that you have read out there, that rollups don't scale, that rollups are a failure, that rollups promise too much and can't deliver. Guys, it's got nothing to do with that. I'm going to break it down for you. So I've talked about this a lot. Arbitrum 1, the currently live Arbitrum network, is throughput limited. Now, what this means is that they've got literally a hard cap on how many transactions they can process, and it's based on how much gas can be used on the network, because it's similar to how Ethereum Layer 1 is. Now, the Ethereum Layer 1 gas limit, as it exists today, is 15 million. I mean, technically the gas limit's 30 million, but it's actually 15 million. It's just the way AIP 1559 works. But I guess that's just going off track a little bit there. But on Arbitrum, it's different. Like, I don't know the exact figure of what it is on Arbitrum, but from my understanding, you could probably do about 250 to 300,000 transactions per day, and then you hit the limit of what Arbitrum can kind of like handle there. Now, once you hit the limit, what happens, guys? Like, I'll give you a couple of seconds to think of the answer here. What happens when you hit the limit of a blockchain's scalability? Oh, the fees go up, right? The blockchain's throughput, I should say. The fees go up. It's what happens on Ethereum Layer 1. It's what happens on every other chain out there, except for ones that don't have fee markets like Solana. And then what happens to Solana when they get spammed with transactions and they can't handle the load? It falls over. Like, I've talked about this a lot. But anyway, that's the kind of like track we're on right now. So Ethereum Layer 1 can typically process, depending on how much gas is used for that day and what transactions are done, 1 to 1.5 million transactions per day based on the current gas limit. And as I said, it is based on the gas used. It is not based on transactions, because not every transaction is created equal, because each transaction uses different amounts of gas. So there's that aspect to it. So same is true for Arbitrum, because they've got their own kind of like AVM, which is the kind of like Arbitrum virtual machine, and they process transactions differently to Ethereum Layer 1, but it's still kind of the same concept there. And that brings me to my second point about Arbitrum, is that the reason why they're throughput limited is because of the fact that they're waiting to deploy Nitro, which is this massive protocol upgrade that will fix a lot of the things that are currently limited about the Arbitrum 1 network. And that throughput limit is the key here. So once Nitro goes live, the hope is that they can kind of like, they'll probably still have a throughput limit, but like raise that much higher than what it is, so they can have more capacity for transactions. So that is the reason why Arbitrum transactions got more expensive than Ethereum Layer 1, because the demand for Arbitrum exceeded that limit. And to get your transactions in, you needed to pay more. As simple as that. It's the same thing with Ethereum Layer 1. Now, does this kill rollups? Does this kill the rollup thesis? Does this mean rollups are broken? No, it does not mean they are broken. It just means that we are still very early. I've said this plenty of times on the Refuel. And obviously, everyone talking and fudding on Twitter and stuff don't watch the Refuel, because if they did, they'd know this. Like, this is basic stuff that I talk about a lot on this show. But essentially, like, the thing is that it's got nothing to do with the fundamentals of a rollup. It's just simply got to do with the fact that there's a hard limit on how many transactions can be processed, and because of that, people outbid each other once the limit is reached. Now, why was Arbitrum so popular? Because this Odyssey event is extremely popular, and also some apps on Arbitrum So there's actually more to this than just the two things I've brought up. So some apps on Arbitrum aren't doing gas fee estimation correctly, and there's also other infrastructure issues there as well, which again aren't inherent to the rollup itself, but surrounding the rollup. So infrastructure issues, you could call them, sort of like when an RPC goes down. And for those of you who don't know, an RPC is basically a node that you hit to relay your transactions, whether it be a third-party node or your own node. And typically, from time to time, we see that RPCs get overloaded. It doesn't mean the rollup's gone down, but it means that the RPC is having trouble processing or relaying your transactions to the network. So there's maybe, slowness there, or maybe just there's no transactions being processed at all because of that, right? So there's that aspect to it as well. So that's why they paused Odyssey, because they're like, okay, well, we should get Nitro out before we kind of let people hit this. And I really do think that they underestimated the demand for this, especially in a bear market. Like, I honestly didn't think there would be this much demand for it, considering the bear market that we're in. But I think that's bullish that there's been this much demand. But at the same time, I really do think Arbitrum should have put Nitro live before they did Odyssey. Like, I know, as I said, they probably underestimated the demand, but it kind of feels like in hindsight, yeah, Nitro should have definitely gone live before Odyssey. But I just wanted to clear up that FUD there, because I'm so sick of it. Like, guys, I was talking to a friend about this, and they kind of like, they didn't ask me this question, but they kind of like alluded to us, like why I get so passionate about this stuff, why I go on my rants about this stuff, why I get so angry about it, is because if you're just like an everyday observer, you're just a regular user, and you're kind of like seeing these sorts of things happen, and you're just kind of like lurking, then you're probably not, not going to stress too much about it. But me, as an educator, as someone who tries to clear up the FUD, who's someone who has a big presence, right, in the community, as someone who talks about layer 2s a lot, as someone who is very well known, I get bombarded with questions around this sorts of stuff all the time. As soon as something like this happens, I get constantly bombarded with questions. And I don't mind the questions, but at the same time, you can probably see why, for me, it hits a lot closer to home than someone else, because of the fact that, like, I'm seeing all this, I'm getting bombarded with these questions, and I'm just like, oh my god, like, this is just insane. And I kind of think to myself, like, how do we educate people more? Like, how can we do more here? I don't know what else I could be doing. I mean, I do so much already. Like, what else is there for me to do? And then I kind of like I look and I'm like, well, I think at the end of the day, there's only so much I can do. And then it falls on everyone else to want to kind of like go out there and get the knowledge. And then there's a large number of people who actually don't care about the truth. All they care about is fudding rollouts because they're invested in other ecosystems. And you know what? I can't change that. I don't think anyone can change that. I think that's just a kind of like natural consequence of the competition that we have between different networks. And that's totally fine. But yeah, it always just annoys me when people have this wrong take on things, like completely wrong take on things, and don't realize that there's a reason for this. Like, people go straight to, oh, rollups are fundamentally broken, instead of just like digging a little bit deeper below the surface to see what the actual issue was. And the actual issue is that Arbitrum 1 is throughput limited, and because of that, the fees went up once they hit the kind of a limit there. And the same is going to be true for every single blockchain, every single crypto network, every single anything, guys. Like, as I said, if you don't have a fee market to control congestion, your network gets spammed, it falls over. So what would you prefer? I personally prefer a fee market to control congestion and then increasing the amount of throughput that we have on these chains, rather than letting the chain fall over. Now, obviously, there's a debate about that as well. People are like, oh, well, falling over is fine as long as we get like really cheap fees and throughput. And I'm just like, I don't understand that at all, especially in a DeFi world. That is just such a bizarre take to me. Well, that's a take, and that's fine. I mean, there's different philosophies. But rollups are early. Nothing has unlimited scalability. We're going to see how far we can push rollups, how much transactions per second or throughput we can get. We're hoping we can get, coupled with the sharding upgrades that are coming, to potentially millions of transactions per second eventually. That's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next year. That millions of transactions per second, it could happen in 5 to 10 years, right? So we just have to keep working towards that. Scalability is a marathon, not a sprint. We can't make it happen overnight. There is still plenty of work to be done here, and we need to do it in a safe way as well, because we're dealing with money. We can't just play cowboy with people's money. And we've seen the teams that play cowboy with people's money. They lose people's money, and then people get scared off and leave the ecosystem. That's the worst outcome. So let's not be too harsh on these kind of teams that are on the bleeding edge of scalability, and realize that there are methods to the madness. There's a reason why things are the way they are, and kind of like if you see this FUD, if you see this bad information out there, if you feel confident enough, you should correct it yourself. Like, I think that's the best way to educate a wide range of people, is like, it just shouldn't just fall on myself, you know, Bankless, a bunch of other educators out there. It should definitely fall to everyone. But only if you feel confident. Like, I'm not going to force everyone to be like, oh, you should be debunking that FUD, or you're not a true Etherean, right? I don't think that at all. But I think that education comes from everyone. You don't have to be an educator to educate. You can just, you know, correct someone, or you can just kind of like give someone the right information. Everyone can spread education, whether you've got a large following or a small following or no following. It doesn't matter. As long as you're educating people and then they can go educate people as well, I think that's what matters. Anyway, I promised I wouldn't rant too long about this in the Discord channel before, so I'm going to move on for today, but hopefully that clears up a lot of the stuff for you guys. All right, so speaking of scalability, Polygon has introduced Polygon Avail's testnet today. So I've spoken about Avail before. This is basically Polygon's data availability blockchain. It's their solution. I guess like it's their solution, or I guess competition to something like Celestia, for example. So what you can do with this is what they've described in this thread here. Basically, you can post your data to Polygon Avail and then post the proof to Ethereum Layer 1, and you can have a validium, right? So you can see here exactly what it is. So a ZK rollup is when the proof and data both goes to Ethereum. A validium is when the transaction data goes to a kind of like a data availability chain or a data availability committee, and the proof still goes to Ethereum. Now, why is this cool? Why is this good? Like, shouldn't we just, you know, focus on rollups or all that sorts of stuff? Well, it goes back to what I was saying before. Rollups are awesome, but they're not where we want them to be today. There is heaps of scalability demand today, still, even in the bear market, but the technology is not there yet. So let's use all the tools that are available to us. And I've been pretty consistent with this view as well. I talk about this with regards to optimistic versus ZK rollups. Let's just be very kind of like consistent with our kind of like view on these things, and definitely kind of like look at all these solutions as growing the pie together, I think, especially if they still use Ethereum, right? And I mean, the reason why you want to like posting data to Avail would be something that a team would want to do. It's to bring costs down, because posting data to Ethereum is very, very expensive right now, and it's going to remain expensive until we have proto-dank sharding, and even then, it's still going to like eventually we're going to hit a limit there, and the fees will just go up again. So until we get full data sharding, which could take until like 2024, maybe, like I'm talking like the full rollout of data sharding, right? Not just proto-dank sharding. I'm talking about like the entire thing, like a complete a data sharding feature set. Is probably going to take a couple of years still. So in the meantime, we need the scalability. So let's make sure that people can post their data to things that aren't just like a consortium, right? Obviously, posting data to like a handful of nodes, like a data availability committee or something like that you don't even know, you can't even run your own node for, you can't do anything for, is insecure. But with Avail, right, or the way that they're kind of like building Avail, from my understanding here, is that they want to allow people to run nodes, like me and you, to run these nodes and run this stuff on our own software, potentially stake Matic tokens, right, to participate in the network and things like that, and kind of like get rewarded for that. So I think that when you think of the solutions like in that context, it makes a lot of sense, and that's why I'm really bullish on something like Polygon Avail. And it's, as I said, it's hit testnet now. And you guys know I'm an advisor to Polygon, so like obviously I'm going to have a little bit of bias here, but I think that Polygon, they, instead of going for like the rollup maximalist approach, they've taken the scalability maximalist approach, right? With Ethereum in mind, of course, where they're like, okay, well, rollups are bloody awesome. We're going to build lots of rollups, but there are other scalability solutions that we can build today that are really cool as well. Yes, they're not like full Ethereum security and full Ethereum decentralization, but there is demand today that needs to be met. So let's meet it with the tools that we have. And then eventually when rollups mature to the place that we want them to get to, we can move people to that, right? For example. So I think that approach is pragmatic. It's probably not the approach that, you know, we'll kind of like win out long term, but this is more about short to medium term than the long term. The longer term, I think the rollups are just going to eat everything. But until we get to the point where rollups can be very, very cheap, thanks to dank sharding and data sharding and all that sorts of stuff, we're going to need these other solutions, that's for sure. So very cool to see this from Polygon. Definitely go check out their announcement. I'll link it in the YouTube description. So Consensus announced that they have partnered with Starkware on a strategic partnership to set a product partnership and a set of product integrations that will make Starknet the first ZK rollup layer 2 supported by Infura and Metamask. So basically, Infura and Metamask are kind of like partnering with Starkware to enhance Starknet here. This is pretty cool. Obviously, Infura and Metamask are two of the most popular things within Ethereum. And the funny thing about these solutions is that most people have no idea what Infura is, but most people use Infura, right? It's that RPC relay that's default in MetaMask, and everyone pretty much knows what MetaMask is. It's funny how those two things are like basically polar opposites, but both consensus products, both extremely important to Ethereum, and now going to be used within the Starknet ecosystem, which is very cool to see as well. And this is the kind of like key infrastructure that's needed for these layer twos. You can't just have like some kind of like bare bones infrastructure. You need battle tested, battle hardened, scalable infrastructure to service user requests, because at the end of the day, most users do not use their own RPC, right? They outsource it to a third party, which is fine, but it becomes an issue when these RPCs can't handle the load, and then users kind of like blame the network, right? They're like, oh, like I think when Optimism had their RPC issues, they were like blaming the Optimism network, fighting rollups again, when in reality it was just the RPC that was having issues. And this has happened plenty of times before with many RPCs. And even with Infura on Ethereum, for example. So I think it's good to have battle tested and battle hardened infrastructure available for Starknet here. So very cool to see this. Definitely go check it out. I'll link it in the YouTube description. All right, so we finally have a bit of an update here from Compound Labs about their multi-chain strategy. Now, for those of you who remember, Compound Labs announced in December 2020 that they were pursuing a comp chain, similar to what DYDX chain is doing now. That didn't really go anywhere. They were building it with Polkadot's Substrate tool rather than Cosmos's Tendermint or Cosmos SDK tool. So it was a different implementation, but it was still the same thing. Like, let's build an app chain and like build bridges between it and all that sorts of stuff there. Well, they've pivoted away from that, they being Compound, and now they're taking the let's deploy to all the networks that exist today approach, which is the approach that a lot of other apps have taken and is the most pragmatic one. And they're going to start with EVM compatible chains, obviously the layer 2s and things like Polygon POS and the other layer 1s that are EVM compatible and stuff like that. And then they're going to work towards kind of like just deploying to as many networks as possible and connecting them together as well. So cool to see this. I do like that. Like they didn't just kind of like throw in the towel here altogether and just like say, okay, well, Compound's done. We're just going to leave it on Ethereum layer 1. We're not even going to worry about deploying to layer 2s or anything. But they've actually kind of said, no, we're going to spin up a whole new Compound 3 or V3, and we're going to be deploying it to kind of like the EVM chains where the activity already is, where a lot of other apps are. And it's really cool because I like using Compound. I mean, I still use it on mainnet from time to time, but I'd love to be able to use it on layer 2s, for example. Obviously, Aav's on the layer 2s, and I think Compound kind of lagged here, but they're coming. And it's really cool to see this. And I guess it kind of like speaks to the fact that app chains are kind of like, I don't know, pointless for some things and maybe makes sense for other things. The funny thing is, I spoke about the DYDX stuff the other day, and there's been a lot of discussion since, and I'm still convinced that they're doing it for regulatory reasons. But I think if I had to play devil's advocate, DYDX is one of the only things that I can see that it makes sense for them to do like a standalone app chain, right, without any composability. Now, I disagree with the implementation. I don't think that they should do it as a Cosmos chain. I think they should do it as a roll-up, and they have, and I think they should remain a roll-up. But in terms of composability, they don't need it because like they've been successful without it. You just deposit USDC into the network, and then everything's kind of like derivative, and you trade perpetuals on there, and there's no need for that kind of like strict composability. Whereas something with like Compound, there is, because it's a money market. You want to be able to do stuff with funds that you borrow and kind of like have like money Legos and things like that. So it didn't really make sense when Compound announced it. But I think for DYDX, it makes sense. But I just wish they would kind of like reconsider and stick to the layer 2 that they have. But again, I understand why they don't, if I take the regulatory view, because they can't decentralize on a roll-up today, but we'll have to see how that plays out in the future on that front. But if you want the full details of Compound 3 here, you can read this. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. All right, so some really shitty regulatory news out of the EU today. And the EU has been decidedly really bad about crypto over the last few months, and especially with this ruling. So there's this guy, Ernest, who kind of like put out this tweet thread today, saying, deal. After months of negotiations with the council, we agreed the most ambitious travel rule for transfers of crypto assets in the world. We are putting an end to the wild west of unregulated crypto, closing major loopholes in the European anti-money laundering rules. So the TLDR of this is that they're basically imposing more restrictions on transfers to what they're calling unhosted wallets, which is basically just your own wallet. And I freaking hate the use of the term unhosted wallet because it makes it sound so nefarious when it's not. It's just your own wallet, right? So anything over €1,000 will be subject to stricter kind of like checks on that kind of amount to transfer it out of like a centralized exchange, for example, to your own wallet. Now, these people think they're doing something good. This council thinks they're doing something good here. They think they're fighting money laundering. They think they're fighting terrorist financing and child pornography. Those are always the two things that they talk about. Like three things actually: money laundering, terrorist financing, and child pornography are the three things that regulators constantly talk about in order to push things through, because those are the things that they get broad support for from everyday people who don't understand any better or don't know any better. And I kind of like quote tweeted this by saying, this council just took away individual freedoms in the name of preventing money laundering. So they're not preventing really anything here. It's so stupid because if you're trying to money launder through a centralized exchange, you're either already doxxed because you have to KYC anyway, or you've bought an account and you don't care that they can kind of like see who the person is that you bought the account from is, right? In that respect. But also, once you withdraw the funds to your own wallet, you can just tornado cash out and basically wash all the funds anyway. So this rule is made by a bunch of kind of like, I guess, regulators here who just don't have any understanding of crypto at all. And it's extremely unpopular within crypto, of course, but I saw this and I'm like, this just makes no sense to me. But the thing is that this is the control that they want, right? They don't want crypto to be, as they said here, the Wild West. For better or worse, they don't want that. And this is the first step for them. Basically, you know, you could see an end state where they basically outright ban you from using your own wallet. And they can basically say, you're not allowed to transfer to your own wallet, or if you transfer to your own wallet, and then you interact with one of these blacklisted applications, you're not going to be able to transfer back to a centralized exchange or anything like that. Like, you can see how this gets very draconian, very dystopian, very, very quickly. We need to stop this. But at the same time, I don't think we can. Like, I don't think we can actually directly stop this sort of stuff in places like the EU and kind of like places, a bunch of other places around the world. We can stop it by building better decentralized tools. But as I said before, guys, they're coming for the choke points. And the choke points are decentralized onboarding, kind of like places like centralized exchanges, fiat on-ramps, and stablecoins. They're coming for both of those things. And you need to prepare yourself for that. You can't just wish that it's not going to happen. It's happening, and it's happening fast. And as I said, they think they're doing the right thing. They think that, and they believe that they're actually preventing the things that they're talking about. Like, this is what where the kind of like term "the road to hell is paved with good intentions" comes from, because a lot of the time these people aren't actually, you know, the kind of like clownish evil that you may think they are. They don't think themselves evil at all. They actually think they're doing good, and they're doing a lot of good by doing this. And that's the most dangerous thing about this, because convincing them that what they're doing is not good is a lot harder in that respect, because they don't want to be told that they're wrong. They don't want to be told that what they're doing is wrong, and they're going to fight that. So I don't know how it works in the EU. I don't know how to change this in the EU. Like, I have absolutely no kind of like read on that. And I think the EU is in just a shit place in general right now. I don't even know what's going to happen with the EU over the next few years, considering all the geopolitical stuff going on. But this is not good, guys. And this is not just going to be in the EU. This is going to come to everywhere, and it's really, really shitty for adoption. So I hope that we can fight it in some way. I know I said that it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, to fight. I don't think it's going to be impossible. I think it's going to be hard. I think we need to keep educating regulators. And as I said, I think that the ones to educate, the hardest ones to educate are those who actually think they're doing a good job. So yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna leave it there. You can read this thread for kind of like a breakdown of exactly what this is, how it all kind of like works here. But yeah, I just think this is quite disgusting. Taking away individual freedoms just so you can try and prevent money laundering, which you can't even do anyway, because how many banks in Europe have been caught money laundering for drug cartels and other kind of like nefarious activity, right? Plenty. And, you know, it just hurts the individuals at the end of the day. It hurts law-abiding individuals more than it hurts the criminals, I think. All right, so Immutable has announced staking today. So the first cycle of IMX staking will start on the 1st of July, which is tomorrow. So you can move your IMX tokens to your ImmutableX Layer 2 wallet before then to participate in staking here. So there's a thread breakdown of how this all works. You'll have a staking dashboard, all that good stuff there. But yeah, if you do hold IMX tokens, you can begin staking starting tomorrow, which is very, very cool to see. So definitely go check out this thread. I'll link it in the YouTube description. And just finally, to wrap us up here, I just had my kind of like talk with Stani as part of the merge series I'm doing with SSV Network. You can go listen to the recording. I'll link this in the YouTube description below. And be sure to catch my talk with Ben Edgington, which is happening tomorrow being kind of like Friday my time. I think it's going to be at the same time as I did the one with Stani. So it's going to be like, I think afternoon Europe, really early morning US. So definitely check that out as well. You can go to SSV Network and sign up there, but it's recorded just like the Stani one has been recorded, so you don't have to catch it live if you don't have the time to. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I've gone over time, so thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks everyone.